You are standing in the brilliant Castilian sunshine, the air thick with tension as a young woman rides through the crowded streets of Segovia. The year is 1474, and this is no ordinary procession. The woman's face simultaneously determined and serene betrays nothing of the mortal danger surrounding her. Armed men flank her modest entourage, hands resting on sword hilts, eyes scanning rooftops for assassins. This 23-year-old woman, Isabella of Castile, is about to commit what many consider treason. Her half-brother, King Henry IV, has just died, and against all expectations, against powerful nobles who would crush her, against neighboring Portugal readying for invasion, she has decided to claim the throne of Castile, one of Europe's most powerful kingdoms. As cathedral bells toll across the city, you watch as Isabella dismounts, her simple gown lacking royal finery. Walking deliberately toward Segovia's main square, she passes a marketplace that falls silent at her approach. The people are wondering, will this young woman be queen by nightfall, or a prisoner condemned to death? What nobody in that square could possibly imagine is that this audacious moment of courage would transform not just Spain, but the entire world. For this woman, underestimated, overlooked, and forced into a marriage she never wanted, would soon build one of history's greatest empires, reshape European power forever, and launch an age of exploration that would change the very map of human civilization. But first, she must survive this day. Medieval Europe in the mid-15th century was a continent in transformation. The Black Death's devastating shadow had receded, leaving societies forever changed. The Renaissance was flowering in Italy, while the printing press was beginning to revolutionize the spread of knowledge. Yet amid this awakening, the Iberian Peninsula remained a fractured, volatile patchwork of competing kingdoms. Castile, occupying the central plateau of what would eventually become Spain, was the largest and most powerful of these realms. Rich in grain fields and sheep pastures, commanding critical trade routes, Castile's potential power was undeniable. But potential means little without proper leadership, and Castile was a kingdom in crisis. For decades, Castile had suffered under weak monarchs. Henry IV, mockingly called the impotent by his detractors, had allowed powerful noble families to essentially run the kingdom as their personal fiefdoms. Law and order had deteriorated to the point where travelers could scarcely journey between cities without armed escorts. Bandits controlled the countryside, while noble families engaged in private wars that drained the kingdom's resources and terrorized common people. The economy, once vibrant, had withered. Debased coinage circulated alongside genuine currency, creating financial chaos. Tax collection had become so corrupted that the royal treasury stood nearly empty despite the kingdom's natural wealth. In the markets of Burgos, Toledo, and Segovia, merchants complained of highway robbery, arbitrary tolls demanded by local lords, and the impossibility of enforcing contracts when each noble administered justice according to personal whim. The south lay Granada, the last remaining Muslim kingdom on the peninsula, a remnant of the once mighty Moorish presence that had dominated Iberia for centuries. The Reconquista, the Christian reconquest of Muslim territories, had stalled, with frontier zones becoming lawless borderlands, where raids and counter-raids created perpetual insecurity. Meanwhile, Portugal to the west watched Castile's instability with strategic interest, while France to the north maneuvered to keep the Iberian kingdoms divided and weak. Aragon, the other major Christian kingdom in Iberia, maintained an uneasy peace with Castile, but dynastic politics meant alliances could shift overnight. Religion dominated daily life, with the Catholic Church wielding enormous influence. Yet, religious practice had grown corrupted in many areas, with ecclesiastical positions bought and sold, and many clergy members neglecting their spiritual duties. Jews and conversos, Jews converted to Christianity, formed vital communities throughout Castile, especially in commerce and administration. but lived under increasing suspicion and periodic outbreaks of violence. The educational system remained largely in clerical hands, with universities at Salamanca and Valladolid producing graduates versed in law, theology, and medicine. However, noble families often considered learning less important than martial skills, and literacy remained limited even among the elite. For women, opportunities were severely constrained. Expected to marry according to family alliance strategies, noble women received little education beyond household management, religious instruction, and perhaps music or needlework. Queens were valued primarily as producers of male heirs and diplomatic assets. The idea of a woman ruling independently was viewed with deep suspicion throughout Europe. It was in this environment, a once great kingdom sliding into anarchy, where corruption flourished and common people suffered, that a transformative leader was most desperately needed. Castile required not just a ruler, but a visionary who could reimagine governance itself. The kingdom needed someone who understood that true power flows not from fear, but from justice. Someone who could unite fractured territories into a coherent nation. What Castile needed was precisely what seemed most unlikely: a woman of unshakable conviction, brilliant strategic mind, and moral fortitude who could overcome the entrenched resistance to female leadership. The irony of history is that this exact person was already within the kingdom, watching and learning from the chaos, preparing herself for a role no one expected her to play. In the royal household itself, a quiet revolution was brewing, one that would ultimately reshape not just Castile, but the entire world map. On April 22, 1451, in the small town of Madrigal de las Altas Torres, Isabella entered the world with little fanfare. As the daughter of King John II of Castile and his second wife, Isabella of Portugal, she was merely a secondary princess, far removed from the succession. Her father died when she was just 3 years old, leaving the throne to her half-brother Henry. With his death, Isabella and her younger brother Alfonso found themselves in a precarious position. Royal children with little protection in a court rife with intrigue. The new king, lacking affection for his half-siblings, dispatched them with their widowed mother to the remote castle of Arevalo. This effective exile, meant to diminish the children's royal connections, would instead forge Isabella's extraordinary character. Life at Arevalo was austere compared to the royal court. The castle, while defensible, was drafty and isolated. Resources were limited, as King Henry provided only minimal allowances for his half-siblings' upkeep. Here, far from the intrigues of court, young Isabella developed an inner strength and self-reliance that would later define her reign. I learned more from the winds howling through Arevalo's halls than I ever would have in the whispers of courtiers, Isabella would later confide to a trusted advisor. The simplicity of life taught her to value substance over show, integrity over image. Isabella's mother, struggling with what historians now believe was depression, retreated increasingly into religious devotion and occasional periods of confusion. Rather than breaking under this strain, young Isabella stepped into a caretaking role, developing remarkable maturity. By age 10, she was effectively managing the household, directing servants, and providing emotional stability for her younger brother. Her education, though limited by medieval standards, proved surprisingly thorough. The local priest recognized her exceptional intelligence and taught her not just prayers, but Latin, history, and literature beyond what was typical for noble girls. Isabella devoured these lessons, often reading by candlelight long after her tutors had retired. "The princess asks more questions than I can answer," her tutor reportedly complained to the castle steward. "She seeks not just to know, but to understand." A defining characteristic emerged early: Isabella's profound religious faith. Unlike the performative piety common at court, her spirituality was deeply personal and authentic. She spent hours in prayer, not from obligation but from genuine devotion. This faith would later become both her moral compass and a source of unshakable courage. When Isabella was 10, an unexpected royal summons arrived. King Henry, concerned about potential rival claims to the throne, wanted his half-siblings under direct observation at court. The transition from isolated Arevalo to the sophisticated royal household in Madrid was jarring. The court of Henry IV was a study in contradictions, outwardly magnificent, but morally compromised. Lavish entertainments masked political decay. The king himself, well-meaning but ineffectual, had surrendered much of his authority to ambitious nobles. Isabella, with her clear-eyed perspective, saw through the gilded facade to the corruption beneath. One particular incident revealed her unusual moral clarity. During a sumptuous court banquet, Isabella, then barely 13, observed a royal treasurer openly boasting about manipulating tax records. When others laughed appreciatively at his cleverness, Isabella remained stone-faced. Later, when asked why she hadn't smiled, she replied simply, "I cannot find humor in stealing from the people who trust us to lead them." The statement, remarkable for someone so young and vulnerable, circulated through court, earning her both admirers and enemies. It was the first public glimpse of the principled leader she would become. As Isabella approached marriageable age, she found herself at the center of international negotiations. King Henry, seeing her as a diplomatic pawn, entertained proposals from Portugal, England, and France. Each potential match was calculated for political advantage with little regard for Isabella's welfare. Through these machinations, something unexpected was happening. The princess, theoretically powerless, was quietly building alliances. Ladies-in-waiting, minor nobles, clergy members, people dismissed as inconsequential by the powerful found in Isabella, someone who listened genuinely and remembered their concerns. "She speaks little," noted a visiting Portuguese ambassador, "but misses nothing." By her 16th birthday, despite her seemingly powerless position, Isabella had begun crafting a network of loyal supporters. This web of relationships, built on mutual respect rather than fear or bribery, would later prove crucial to her rise. The forgotten princess was becoming a force to be reckoned with. Though few at court recognized the transformation underway, the spark of leadership had been lit, a spark that would eventually ignite a revolution in governance and set a new standard for monarchs throughout Europe. Isabella's adolescence at court became a masterclass in political survival. At an age when most noble girls focused on music and needlework, she was studying power, who held it, how they wielded it, and most importantly, how they misused it. Her greatest early mentor was not a mighty warrior or renowned statesman, but Cardinal Pedro González de Mendoza, a brilliant ecclesiastic who recognized in the teenage princess an extraordinary mind. Though their meetings were ostensibly for religious instruction, Mendoza subtly expanded these lessons to include statecraft, diplomacy, and governance. "Your greatest weapon," he once told her, "will be your ability to listen before you speak and to speak with purpose when you do." Isabella absorbed this wisdom, developing a distinctive communication style, measured, precise, and remarkably persuasive. The cardinal arranged for selected books to reach Isabella's chambers: histories of great rulers, treatises on just governance, and accounts of military strategy. These texts, radical reading for a young woman in 15th century Spain, provided Isabella with theoretical frameworks that few of her male counterparts possessed. "Knowledge," she wrote in her personal devotional, "is a fortress no sword can breach." Her first significant political trial came when her brother Alfonso, age 11, was proclaimed king by rebels opposing Henry IV. This civil war placed Isabella in an impossible position, torn between loyalty to her brother and her legitimate king. Rather than choosing sides impulsively, she made the remarkable decision to remove herself from both camps, retreating temporarily to a monastery. This strategic neutrality, interpreted by some as indecision, was in fact a calculated move. From her monastic refuge, she maintained communication with moderate elements on both sides, positioning herself as a potential bridge between factions rather than another source of division. When Alfonso died unexpectedly in 1468, the rebel nobility turned to 17-year-old Isabella as their new figurehead. Here came her first great political masterstroke. Rather than allowing herself to be proclaimed queen in opposition to Henry, she negotiated the Treaty of Torres de Gazando, whereby she was recognized as Henry's legitimate heir in exchange for peace. "I would rather be a certain successor than an uncertain queen," she reportedly told the astonished nobles who had expected her to seize the crown immediately. This pragmatic decision revealed Isabella's emerging political philosophy: legitimate authority was preferable to expedient power grabs. It also demonstrated her willingness to delay gratification for strategic advantage, a rare quality in medieval politics dominated by impulsive ambition. The treaty, however, came with conditions. Henry insisted on controlling Isabella's marriage, intending to wed her to Alfonso V of Portugal, a match designed to neutralize her growing power. Isabella recognized this marriage would effectively end her independence and undermine her future authority. What followed was her boldest move yet. Through secret communications facilitated by loyal supporters, Isabella began negotiations with Ferdinand, heir to the neighboring kingdom of Aragon. Ferdinand, though slightly younger than Isabella, was already an experienced military leader with a reputation for strategic brilliance. The potential union of Castile and Aragon through marriage offered tremendous advantages for both kingdoms, but King Henry vigorously opposed it, preferring the Portuguese alliance. Isabella, technically bound to obey her king, faced a momentous decision: political obedience versus what she believed was best for Castile's future. In October 1469, having arranged elaborate diversions to distract Henry's spies, Isabella slipped away from her guards and traveled to Valladolid. There, in a private ceremony with only trusted witnesses, she married Ferdinand. The wedding was deliberately modest. Isabella wore a simple gown rather than royal finery, symbolizing that this union was about governance, not grandeur. The marriage contract itself revealed Isabella's extraordinary foresight and negotiating skill. Rather than accepting the standard terms that would have made her subordinate to her husband, she insisted on a partnership of equals. She would retain sovereign control over Castile. Ferdinand could not appoint officials, distribute lands, or make decisions without her consent. "My crown shall remain upon my own head," she stipulated in the agreement, a revolutionary concept in an era when queens were expected to defer to kings in all matters. Henry's fury at this defiance was predictable. He disinherited Isabella and recognized his daughter Joanna as heir instead. Isabella and Ferdinand found themselves essentially exiled from court, living modestly in Aragon with limited resources and uncertain prospects. These years of political wilderness became crucial training for Isabella. Working alongside Ferdinand, she developed practical skills in administration, diplomacy, and strategic planning. Together they studied the problems plaguing Castile: lawlessness, corruption, economic decay, and formulated detailed plans for reform. "The misfortunes of today," she wrote to a supporter during this period, "are simply preparing us to better govern tomorrow." Isabella also used this time to build relationships with key Castilian cities and influential clergy members, promising justice and stability should she eventually rule. Her consistent message that leadership should serve the people rather than exploit them resonated powerfully in a kingdom weary of noble excesses. By 1474, Isabella had transformed from a sheltered princess into a formidable political strategist, with clear vision and growing support. When news arrived that King Henry had died suddenly, she was not merely ready for the opportunity, she had been methodically preparing for it. For years, the stage was set for one of history's most remarkable ascensions to power. December 13, 1474, King Henry IV of Castile was dead, and the kingdom stood at a precipice. Despite years of preparation, Isabella faced a moment of truth that would determine not just her fate, but Castile's future. The legitimate succession remained disputed, with many powerful nobles supporting Joanna, Henry's daughter, instead of Isabella. Isabella received the news while in Segovia, a strategic central location, but not necessarily a stronghold of her supporters. Ferdinand was away in Aragon, leaving her without her closest ally and military commander. The logical move might have been to retreat to a secure fortress, gather armies, and prepare for the inevitable civil war. Instead, Isabella made an audacious decision that defied conventional wisdom. She would claim her crown immediately, publicly, and without waiting for military backing. Hesitation now, she told her advisors, would be interpreted as doubt in our rightful claim. We must act with the authority we seek to hold. Within hours of Henry's death, Isabella set her plan in motion. She sent trusted messengers to key cities throughout Castile, announcing her accession and promising fair governance. To Segovia's city council, she delivered a personal address outlining specific grievances she would address, from currency stabilization to highway safety. Then came the masterstroke. Rather than sequestering herself behind castle walls, Isabella walked in procession through Segovia to the main plaza. She wore not elaborate royal regalia but a dignified yet simple gown, conveying both authority and connection to the common people. In the plaza, before thousands of witnesses, Isabella participated in a hastily arranged but symbolically powerful coronation ceremony. As contemporary chronicler Alfonso de Palencia recorded, without crown or scepter, she took the oath to uphold the laws of Castile and protect its people, then received the homage of the city officials and nobles present, conducting herself with such natural dignity that many who came doubting left convinced. This public coronation, unprecedented for a queen claiming power in her own right, changed the political calculus entirely. By presenting herself directly to the people and claiming her inheritance openly, Isabella transformed what might have been dismissed as a power grab into a legitimate succession. News of Isabella's bold move spread rapidly across Castile. Before her opponents could organize resistance, she had established a crucial narrative. Isabella was not fighting for the throne. She already occupied it legitimately. Anyone opposing her would be rebelling against Castile's anointed sovereign. Gambit's brilliance lay in its psychological impact. Many fence-sitting nobles and cities, expecting a prolonged succession struggle, instead faced an accomplished fact. Allegiance became binary, for the crowned queen or against her, yet claiming the throne was only the beginning. Within weeks, King Alfonso V of Portugal invaded Castile in support of Joanna's rival claim, bringing substantial forces and the backing of several powerful Castilian noble families. The War of Castilian Succession had begun, testing Isabella's resolve and fire. This crisis revealed another dimension of Isabella's leadership, her remarkable partnership with Ferdinand. Upon his return from Aragon, many expected him to take command, relegating Isabella to a traditional queen consort role. Instead, they implemented the shared governance model specified in their marriage contract. Ferdinand led military operations in the field, while Isabella secured supply lines, raised funds, rallied public support, and maintained governance in territories under their control. Their complementary skills created a formidable executive team that confounded traditional power structures. In essence, our opponents must defeat two monarchs working as one, Isabella noted to her council. While Ferdinand confronts them on the battlefield, I ensure they find no allies in their rear. The war's turning point came at the Battle of Toro in 1476. Ferdinand's forces won a narrow but decisive victory over the Portuguese, with Isabella personally organizing reinforcements and supplies that proved crucial to the outcome. More important than the military victory was Isabella's response to it. Rather than seeking vengeance against noble families who had supported her opponent, Isabella offered generous terms of reconciliation. Those who pledged loyalty would retain their lands and positions. Only the most egregious traitors faced severe punishment. This clemency, radical for its era, transformed former enemies into grateful supporters. One noble who accepted these terms later wrote, "Where we expected the executioner's axe, we found the extended hand." Such wisdom in victory creates loyalty that fear could never purchase. The War of Castilian Succession dragged on until 1479. But Isabella's position strengthened steadily. Throughout the conflict, she demonstrated not just military resolve but governing vision. Even while fighting for her throne, she began implementing reforms in territories under her control, stabilizing currency, establishing regular courts, and creating a mounted constabulary to secure roads. By war's end, Isabella had achieved what few thought possible: secured her crown, reconciled with most internal opponents, repelled foreign invasion, and begun Castile's reconstruction, all while establishing a revolutionary model of female sovereignty. In a private letter to her childhood confessor, Isabella reflected, "The crown I fought to claim was not for my glory, but for Castile's redemption. Now the true work begins." The turning point had passed. Isabella of Castile was no longer fighting to become queen. She was redefining what queenship itself could accomplish. With her crown secure, Isabella faced the monumental task of transforming a kingdom in disarray into a functioning state. The challenges were overwhelming: depleted treasury, debased currency, lawless countryside, corrupt officials, and a nobility accustomed to operating above the law. Where most rulers would have addressed these problems sequentially over decades, Isabella pursued comprehensive reform with remarkable simultaneity and coordination. Her first target was establishing basic security. The Santa Hermandad, Holy Brotherhood, established in 1476, became one of her most successful innovations. This organized police force, funded by local communities but answering to the crown, deployed mounted officers to patrol highways in rural areas. Within 2 years, road banditry had declined so dramatically that merchants could transport goods with minimal protection. "Before Her Majesty's Brotherhood," wrote a Genoese trader in 1478, "we dared not move valuable cargo without 20 armed guards. Now 2 men suffice, and we travel without fear." Simultaneously, Isabella tackled the currency crisis. Previous administrations had permitted widespread coin clipping and debasement, creating economic chaos. Isabella's mint reform was brilliantly executed. She announced a date when old coinage would be exchanged for new, standardized currency, giving people time to bring forward their money without facing penalties for possessing debased coins. Treasury reform revealed Isabella's distinctive leadership approach. Rather than simply punishing corruption, though she did remove numerous officials, she implemented systematic changes to prevent future abuse. Royal accounts became subject to regular audits. Tax collection was reorganized to reduce opportunities for skimming. The results were dramatic. Within 5 years, royal revenues nearly tripled without increasing tax rates, simply by eliminating leakage through corruption. Ferdinand proved an ideal partner in these reforms. While Isabella focused on internal governance, he managed foreign policy and military affairs. Their famous motto, "Tanto monta, monta tanto, Isabel como Fernando," it amounts to the same. Isabella, as Ferdinand, reflected their genuine partnership. While masking Isabella's subtle precedence in Castilian affairs, perhaps Isabella's most consequential early reform targeted the justice system. Courts had become notoriously corrupt, with verdicts openly purchased and cases lingering for years. Isabella instituted circuit judges answerable directly to the crown, established regular court sessions in major cities, and personally heard appeals on designated days. Her accessibility during these justice audiences became legendary. Twice weekly, Isabella would sit in public session, hearing complaints directly from subjects of all social classes. A contemporary observer noted, "The queen listens with equal attention to the grandee and the peasant, asking penetrating questions that cut through pretense. Those seeking to deceive with flowery language quickly learn that Her Majesty prizes truth above eloquence." This hands-on approach to justice earned Isabella fervent loyalty among common Castilians, who for the first time experienced a monarchy that seemed genuinely concerned with their welfare. It also sent a powerful message to the nobility. One stood above the law in Isabella's Castile. The queen's relationship with the aristocracy represented a masterclass in political recalibration. Rather than attempting to crush noble power directly, which had failed numerous times in Castilian history, Isabella redirected aristocratic energies toward crown service. She created a royal court culture where prestige came from contributing to state objectives rather than undermining them. The nobles who once competed to evade royal authority, noted her chronicler Hernando del Pulgar, now compete for Her Majesty's recognition of their service. Isabella's reform of the church proved equally transformative. Ecclesiastical corruption had reached scandalous levels, with benefices openly bought and sold, clergy living dissolute lives, and religious orders neglecting their duties. Working with reformist clerics like Francisco Jimenez de Cisneros, Isabella systematically elevated qualified, morally upright clergy to key positions. Her religious reforms extended to monasteries and convents, where she insisted on adherence to original rules. These changes met fierce resistance from entrenched interests, but Isabella's persistence gradually produced a more disciplined, respected church that better served its spiritual mission. Education became another focus. Isabella, herself a lifelong learner, supported universities, commissioned translations of important works, and established the first grammar schools for girls. She assembled one of Europe's finest libraries and brought Italian Renaissance scholars to Castile, sparking intellectual revitalization. Perhaps most remarkable was Isabella's personal approach to leadership. Unlike most monarchs who ruled from fixed capitals, she maintained a traveling court, moving regularly throughout her kingdom. This perpetual royal progress served multiple purposes, allowing her to personally assess local conditions, making the monarchy visible to ordinary subjects, and preventing any single city or faction from dominating court politics. During these journeys, Isabella developed an extraordinary knowledge of her realm's geography, economy, and people. Her memory for details astonished courtiers. She could recall specific requests from individuals she had met years earlier, the particular challenges facing remote towns, and the capabilities of local officials throughout Castile. The Queen's mind contains a more accurate map of her territories than any parchment could display. One ambassador observed that by 1480, just 6 years into her reign, Isabella had already achieved what most monarchs couldn't accomplish in a lifetime. Castile had transformed from a kingdom in chaos to an increasingly ordered, prosperous state with functioning institutions. The treasury was solvent, roads were safe, justice was more reliable, and the crown's authority extended effectively throughout the realm. Yet Isabella understood that these domestic reforms, however vital, were merely preparatory for her greater ambition, completing the centuries-long Reconquista by conquering Granada, the last Muslim kingdom on the Iberian Peninsula. This monumental undertaking would require all the resources and legitimacy she had so carefully accumulated. As she confided to her confessor, "We have rebuilt Castile not merely for its own sake, but so it might fulfill its historic destiny. Now we must direct this renewed strength toward completing what our ancestors began." The stage was set for Isabella's most enduring triumph, one that would change the map of Europe forever. Behind Isabella's public triumphs lay private struggles that tested her resolve and humanity. The personal cost of her unprecedented achievement was substantial, though largely hidden from public view by her remarkable self-discipline. The Granada campaign, launched in 1482, demanded extraordinary sacrifice. Isabella transformed herself from administrator to war leader, establishing a field headquarters near the front lines. For 10 grueling years, she managed the logistics of what became medieval Europe's largest military operation, supplying armies, negotiating with contractors, raising funds, and maintaining political cohesion among diverse coalition forces. "The Queen sleeps barely 4 hours nightly," reported her physician Francisco López de Villalobos during the campaign. "She reviews dispatches until midnight, rises before dawn for prayer, then spends her day between council meetings and inspections." This punishing schedule took a visible physical toll. Court portraits from this period show premature aging in a woman not yet 40. She suffered recurring fevers, likely malarial, contracted during summers spent near mosquito-infested battlefields. Yet she refused to retreat to more comfortable quarters, believing her presence essential to maintaining momentum. The war's financial demands created painful dilemmas. Despite treasury reforms, the massive expense of sustained siege warfare strained royal resources to breaking point. Isabella sold royal jewels, pawned crown lands, and took loans at ruinous interest rates rather than abandon the campaign. "I would rather wear plain wool and see Granada captured," she reportedly told concerned advisors, "than dress in gold while failing our historic mission." Perhaps the greatest personal cost came in her role as mother. Isabella bore 5 children. During her reign, Isabella, Juan, Juana, Maria, and Catherine, and took her maternal responsibilities seriously. Unlike many royal parents who delegated child-rearing entirely to servants, she personally supervised their education and spent time with them whenever possible. The demands of state, however, meant frequent, painful separations. During the Granada campaign, her children remained at safer locations, sometimes going months without seeing their mother. Isabella's letters reveal the emotional strain these absences caused. "My heart divides itself daily," she wrote to her eldest daughter, "between duty to the realm God entrusted to me and love for the children He blessed me with." This division became most agonizing when her only son and heir, Juan, fell gravely ill during a critical phase of the Granada campaign. Torn between rushing to his bedside and maintaining the war effort at a pivotal moment, Isabella made the wrenching decision to remain with the army. Though Juan recovered from this particular illness, the incident epitomized the impossible choices her position often demanded. Isabella's relationship with Ferdinand, though generally strong, faced serious tests during this period. Their partnership occasionally strained under competing priorities, with Ferdinand sometimes pursuing Aragonese interests that conflicted with Castilian objectives. These tensions required difficult compromises from both monarchs. Additionally, Isabella endured the pain of Ferdinand's infidelities, a common but nonetheless hurtful reality of royal marriages. With characteristic dignity, she never publicly acknowledged these betrayals, maintaining the image of harmonious partnership essential to their joint rule. Privately, her ladies reported she sought solace in intensified religious devotion during these periods. The Granada War brought moral dilemmas that troubled Isabella's conscience. Though she believed absolutely in the righteousness of reclaiming Iberian lands for Christianity, the suffering caused by siege warfare, including civilian hardship, weighed heavily on her. She insisted on honorable treatment of surrendered populations and punished troops who committed atrocities, positions sometimes at odds with military expediency. "Victory without honor," she told her generals, "is defeat disguised." As the decade-long campaign progressed, Isabella faced growing criticism from war-weary nobles, who questioned the enormous expenditure of blood and treasure. Some whispered that a woman's misguided stubbornness was prolonging an unwinnable conflict. These doubts peaked after several military setbacks in 1489, when even some loyal supporters privately suggested negotiating a face-saving partial victory. Isabella's response to this crisis of confidence revealed her extraordinary resilience. Rather than retreating or compromising, she doubled down, mortgaging her personal property to finance a decisive final push and moving her headquarters even closer to the front lines to demonstrate unwavering commitment. "Those who think my resolve comes from ignorance of war's cost understand neither my heart nor my mind," she told her council. "I persist not because I underestimate the sacrifice, but because I believe the goal justifies it." Her health continued deteriorating under these pressures. By 1491, Isabella suffered from what contemporary accounts suggest was a combination of exhaustion, recurring fevers, and possibly early symptoms of the heart condition that would eventually claim her life. Yet she refused all suggestions to withdraw from active leadership. The personal toll extended beyond physical ailments. Isabella, deeply religious, constantly examined her conscience regarding the morality of her decisions. Her confessor reported her frequent concerns that ambition might be corrupting her spiritual integrity. These doubts led to periods of intense private prayer and fasting, further taxing her depleted physical resources. Despite these multiple layers of personal sacrifice, Isabella maintained the public composure essential to effective leadership. Visitors to her war council invariably commented on her calm decisiveness and clear strategic vision, never suspecting the private struggles behind her composed exterior. This combination of public strength and private vulnerability made Isabella not just an exceptional queen, but a profoundly human one. Her willingness to bear personal costs for what she believed was her divine mission demonstrated that true leadership often demands sacrifice invisible to those who benefit from it. As the Granada campaign entered its final phase, Isabella's personal reserves were nearly exhausted. Yet her greatest test and triumph still lay ahead. January 2, 1492, the winter sun illuminated the towers of the Alhambra, Granada's magnificent palace fortress, as an extraordinary procession approached its gates. At its center rode Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon, resplendent in ceremonial armor and royal regalia. Behind them stretched a column of nobles, clergy, and soldiers extending for miles, the culmination of a 10-year campaign that had consumed the resources of an entire kingdom. The moment represented the crowning achievement of Isabella's reign, the final completion of the Reconquista, the centuries-long Christian reclamation of the Iberian Peninsula. Granada, the last Muslim stronghold in Western Europe, was surrendering to the Catholic monarchs. As the Moorish king Abu Abdullah, called Boabdil by the Spanish, presented the keys to his city, witnesses reported that Isabella's typically composed demeanor briefly cracked. A single tear traced down her cheek, not from triumph but from the overwhelming weight of history's fulfillment. "Your Majesty weeps when all others celebrate," whispered a courtier. "I weep," Isabella replied, "for the magnitude of God's design, that He would choose such imperfect instruments as ourselves to complete what 20 generations could not." The capture of Granada represented more than territorial expansion. It transformed the Iberian Peninsula from fragmented, vulnerable kingdoms into what would soon become a unified Spain, a nation poised to become Europe's first global power. The victory immediately elevated Isabella and Ferdinand to international celebrity, with congratulations arriving from every European court. The terms of Granada's surrender revealed Isabella's political wisdom. Rather than imposing harsh conditions that might provoke future rebellions, she granted remarkably generous protections to the city's inhabitants. Muslims could retain their property, practice their religion, maintain their customs, and be judged under their own legal system. These provisions, though later eroded, demonstrated Isabella's preference for stability through accommodation rather than subjugation through force. Within the triumphant Christian camp, Isabella managed the delicate task of rewarding contributors to victory while preventing any faction from gaining disproportionate influence. Land grants, Titles and offices were distributed according to a carefully calibrated system that balanced merit with political considerations. Yet even as Granada's conquest was being celebrated throughout Christian Europe, Isabella was already focusing on what this victory made possible. With peninsular security achieved and royal prestige at its peak, she could now implement her broader vision for Spain's future. The year 1492, already momentous because of Granada's fall, would become one of history's most consequential turning points through three additional developments that defined Isabella's legacy. First came religious consolidation. Having achieved territorial unity, Isabella sought spiritual uniformity. In March 1492, she issued the Alhambra decree ordering all Jews to convert to Christianity or leave Spanish territories within 4 months. This controversial decision influenced by religious convictions, political calculations, and the climate of the time resulted in the exodus of approximately 100,000 to 150,000 Sephardic Jews, many of whom were skilled professionals, merchants, and scholars. Modern historians rightfully criticize this action as both a human tragedy and a self-inflicted wound to Spain's economic and cultural vitality. Yet understanding Isabella requires recognizing that she viewed religious unity as essential to national stability, a conviction widely shared across medieval Europe. For her, the decree represented not persecution, but the necessary completion of Spain's Christian identity. Second pivotal development followed directly from Granada's conquest. With military expenses suddenly reduced, royal finances stabilized for the first time in decades. Isabella seized this opportunity to implement comprehensive governmental reforms that institutionalized her earlier innovations. The Santa Hermandad rural police force was permanently established. Royal courts were formalized with professional judges operating under standardized procedures. Tax collection was systematized, reducing both evasion and corruption. These reforms created Spain's first truly effective central administration, government capable of consistent policy implementation throughout the realm. Most consequentially, Isabella rebalanced power between crown and nobility, rather than attacking aristocratic privileges directly, which had failed under previous monarchs. She created new paths to status through royal service. By establishing a court culture where prestige came from contributing to state objectives, she redirected noble energies from feudal independence toward national projects. The genius of Her Majesty, observed Machiavelli, who studied her methods closely, lies in making the powerful believe they serve themselves, when in fact they serve her design. But history's most dramatic development of 1492 was yet to come. Throughout the Granada campaign, Isabella had maintained sporadic contact with an obscure Genoese navigator named Christopher Columbus, who proposed reaching Asia by sailing westward across the Atlantic. Most monarchs had dismissed his theories as flawed and his demands as excessive. Isabella, however, possessed both the vision to grasp the proposal's potential and the newly available resources to fund it. In April 1492, with Granada secured, she finally approved Columbus's expedition, a decision that would literally change world maps and launch the age of exploration. Her instructions to Columbus revealed her broader thinking. Beyond the expected directives about claiming territories and seeking trade opportunities, she emphasized treating indigenous peoples with respect and introducing them to Christianity through persuasion rather than force. While these humanitarian provisions were often ignored in practice, they demonstrated Isabella's concern for the moral dimension of exploration. When Columbus returned in March 1493 with news of his discoveries, Isabella immediately grasped their historical significance. She moved swiftly to secure Spanish claims, dispatching diplomats to negotiate the Treaty of Tordesillas with Portugal, which divided newly discovered lands between the two kingdoms. This agreement laid the foundation for Spain's vast American empire. These three developments of 1492 religious consolidation, Governmental reform and sponsored exploration transformed Isabella's Spain from a regional power to the world's first truly global empire. The gold and silver that would soon flow from American mines funded Spanish dominance of European politics for the next century. Isabella's legacy-defining achievement was not just conquering Granada or sponsoring Columbus, but creating the governmental, financial, and diplomatic systems that could effectively manage an empire spanning multiple continents. Her administrative innovations enabled Spain to project power globally in ways previously unimaginable. As she wrote to her daughter, "We have not merely expanded our kingdom's borders. We have reimagined what a kingdom can become." By 1493, Isabella of Castile had achieved what few leaders in history could claim. She had fundamentally altered the trajectory of world history, creating ripples that continue to shape our modern world 5 centuries later. The decade following Granada's conquest should have been Isabella's moment of triumph, a period to consolidate achievements and enjoy the fruits of her labors. Instead, it brought personal tragedies that tested her faith and resilience more severely than any previous challenge. The blow struck first in 1496 when her beloved daughter Isabella died in childbirth. Then in 1497, her only son and heir Juan succumbed to fever at just 19. 2 years later, her grandson Miguel, who had become heir apparent, died in infancy. These successive losses devastated Isabella personally while creating dynastic uncertainty for her carefully constructed kingdom. A contemporary wrote, "The queen who conquered kingdoms could not conquer death's cruel harvest. Yet she bore these sorrows with such dignity that only those closest to her witnessed the depth of her grief." Adding to these personal tragedies, Isabella faced the growing realization that her daughter Juana, now heir to Castile, showed signs of mental instability. Modern historians suggest Juana likely suffered from a form of schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, though contemporary observers simply called her disturbed. Isabella's concern for both her daughter's welfare and Castile's future weighed heavily in her final years. Despite these crushing personal blows, Isabella maintained her commitment to governance. Her focus shifted from conquest to consolidation, creating institutions that would survive her passing. She codified laws, reformed universities, established hospitals, and strengthened administrative systems. Perhaps her most significant late-reign initiative was educational reform. Believing that Spain's future depended on knowledgeable leadership, Isabella founded new universities and revitalized existing ones. She established the University of Alcalá as a center for humanist learning, personally selecting faculty and curricula. She also sponsored the Complutensian Polyglot Bible, the first multilingual edition of Scripture, representing the era's most ambitious scholarly project. Education for women became a particular concern. Though Isabella never advocated gender equality in the modern sense, she believed women, especially those of noble birth, required sufficient education to manage estates and participate in court culture. She established schools where girls studied not just religious texts, but literature, mathematics, and languages. As her friend and scholar Beatriz Galindo noted, Her Majesty believes ignorance benefits neither men nor women, and that minds, like fields, yield according to their cultivation. Isabella's relationship with the New World evolved during these years. Initial reports of abuses against indigenous peoples troubled her deeply. In response, she issued proclamations establishing that natives were subjects of the Spanish crown entitled to protection, not slaves to be exploited. When these directives were ignored by colonists, she dispatched investigators with authority to remove abusive officials. Though her interventions could not prevent the devastating impact of conquest and disease on native populations, they represented the earliest attempts by any European monarch to establish ethical principles for colonial governance. Her insistence that indigenous peoples possess natural rights became the foundation for later Spanish laws protecting native communities. As health problems increasingly limited her physical activities, Isabella focused on mentoring the next generation of leaders. She took particular interest in promising young administrators, often inviting them for private audiences where she shared insights from her decades of rule. "The Queen speaks of governance as a master craftsman speaks of their trade," wrote one such protégé. "She distills complex principles into practical wisdom that remains with you long after the conversation ends." By 1504, Isabella's health had deteriorated significantly. Contemporary accounts suggest she suffered from what modern physicians would likely diagnose as heart failure, possibly complicated by cancer. As she prepared for death with characteristic thoroughness, Isabella focused on securing her legacy. Through a carefully crafted will, this remarkable document revealed both her priorities and her foresight. Beyond the expected provisions for succession and property distribution, Isabella included detailed instructions for governmental continuation, religious affairs, and colonial administration. She established protections for indigenous Americans, directed funds for hospitals and poorhouses, and outlined religious reforms she wished completed. Most poignantly, she requested a simple burial without extravagant monuments, directing that money saved should support charitable works. "I wish to be remembered," she wrote, "not through cold marble but through the living monument of a justly governed realm." Isabella died on November 26, 1504. At age 53, her passing prompted extraordinary public mourning throughout Spain. Cities held elaborate memorial services, and chroniclers recorded that even those who had opposed her policies wept, recognizing that a ruler of rare virtue had departed. Her influence, however, continued long after her death. The administrative system she established formed the foundation of the Spanish state for centuries. Her patronage of exploration launched Spain's global empire. Her educational reforms produced generations of scholars and administrators who maintained her governance principles. Perhaps most significantly, Isabella established a new model of female leadership that challenged prevailing gender limitations. Though she never explicitly advocated women's equality, her practical demonstration of female competence influenced how European courts viewed women's capabilities. Queens who followed from Elizabeth I of England to Catherine the Great of Russia studied her methods and drew inspiration from her example. Isabella's legacy remains complex and contested. Her religious policies, particularly regarding Jews and Muslims, caused immense suffering despite reflecting the prevailing attitudes of her era. The colonial empire she helped launch brought both cultural exchange and exploitation to multiple continents. These aspects require critical historical examination alongside her governmental achievements. Yet, even historians who criticize her policies acknowledge Isabella's exceptional qualities as a leader. Her strategic vision, administrative skill, personal courage, and ethical seriousness place her among history's most consequential monarchs. From a fragmented, chaotic kingdom, she forged a unified nation poised for global influence. As historian William Prescott concluded, "History records few sovereigns who accomplished so much from such unpromising beginnings, or who overcame greater obstacles through the force of personal character." In Spain's national memory, Isabella remains La Católica, the Catholic queen whose faith and determination transformed the kingdom and changed the world. Her tomb in Granada's royal chapel, simple as she requested, bears witness to the enduring power of her legacy, placed fittingly in the city whose conquest marked her greatest triumph. As the sun sets over the Alhambra in Granada today, casting the same golden light that illuminated Isabella's triumph 5 centuries ago, we find ourselves contemplating a leader whose life transcends mere historical interest. Isabella of Castile's journey from overlooked princess to world-changing monarch offers timeless lessons that resonate powerfully in our modern context. First and foremost, Isabella exemplifies the transformative power of moral conviction paired with practical action. In an era when cynical pragmatism often dominated politics, she demonstrated that governance grounded in ethical principles could achieve more substantial and lasting results than expedient maneuvering. Her belief that leadership carried moral responsibilities to provide justice, maintain order, and serve the common good drove reforms that outlasted her reign by centuries. Leadership without principle, she once observed, is merely the exercise of power for its own sake. This perspective challenges us to examine our own institutions and leaders. Do we demand ethical foundations for governance, or have we settled for effectiveness without moral purpose? Isabella's legacy suggests that the most enduring achievements flow from leadership that balances pragmatic methods with principled aims. Equally striking was Isabella's capacity to envision possibilities beyond conventional wisdom. When experienced advisors declared Granada unconquerable, Columbus's voyage impractical, or administrative reform impossible, Isabella perceived opportunities where others saw only obstacles. This visionary quality, the ability to imagine a different future and then methodically create it, defines transformative leadership in any era. In our age of accelerating change and complex global challenges, Isabella's example reminds us that breakthrough progress often requires looking beyond established parameters. Whether addressing climate change, economic inequality, or technological disruption, we need leaders who combine Isabella's visionary thinking with her disciplined implementation. Perhaps most relevant to contemporary concerns, Isabella's approach to institutional reform. Rather than merely replacing individuals or making superficial adjustments, she systematically redesigned how governance functioned. Her reforms targeted underlying structures and incentives, creating systems that functioned effectively regardless of who occupied specific positions. This approach offers a powerful model for addressing modern institutional failures. When organizations or governments underperform, we often focus on changing leadership rather than redesigning the systems themselves. Isabella's method suggests that meaningful reform requires both operational expertise and structural vision qualities, rarely combined in a single leader. For women especially, Isabella's achievement retains inspirational power. Without explicitly challenging gender norms, she demonstrated through action that leadership ability transcends gender. She created a model of female authority that was neither an imitation of male leadership nor limited to traditionally feminine domains. Instead, she developed a distinctive approach that integrated strategic vision, practical management, and ethical purpose. As contemporary societies continue working toward gender equality in leadership positions, Isabella's example reminds us that the most powerful statement is often simply demonstrating excellence. Her life suggests that the true measure of leadership lies not in conforming to expectations, but in transcending them through exceptional performance. Yet we must also confront the more troubling aspects of Isabella's legacy, particularly her religious policies. While her faith provided moral foundation and personal strength, it also led to actions that caused immense suffering, most notably the expulsion of Jews and persecution of religious minorities. This complexity challenges us to consider how even principled convictions can lead to harmful outcomes when applied without sufficient empathy or critical examination. In our increasingly diverse societies, Isabella's story underscores the importance of balancing conviction with inclusivity. The greatest leaders maintain clear principles while remaining open to diverse perspectives and respectful of different traditions. A balance Isabella achieved in governance, but not in religious matters. Finally, Isabella's personal resilience offers lessons for navigating our often turbulent world. Despite devastating personal losses, political opposition, and physical illness, she maintained both effectiveness and purpose throughout her reign. This resilience stemmed not from immunity to suffering, but from finding meaning that transcended personal circumstances. A worthy life, she wrote near its end, is measured not by its comfort, but by its purpose. As we face our own challenges, whether personal setbacks, professional obstacles, or societal crises, Isabella's example reminds us that resilience flows from connecting daily efforts to larger meaning. By linking our actions to purposes beyond ourselves, we discover resources of strength and perseverance that circumstances alone cannot exhaust. If you've been inspired by Isabella's extraordinary journey from overlooked princess to world-changing queen, type "Rise" in the comments. Let it serve as a personal commitment to approach leadership in your own sphere, whether family, workplace, or community, with something of her vision, determination, and principled purpose. Isabella of Castile was not merely a product of her time, but a leader who transcended it. From the distance of 5 centuries, her life still illuminates possibilities for meaningful leadership and purposeful living that speak directly to our contemporary needs. In studying her remarkable journey, we discover not just a fascinating historical figure, but a model of human achievement that continues to inspire and challenge us today.